The Reformation was marked by Christians speaking Christian truth in the public arena. That's one of the distinctives that made the Reformation what it was. And it strikes me that one of the serious gaps we have now is Christian, what I would call public intellectuals, Christians who are speaking to the key issues of our day. And we have been blessed in ELF with a good number of men and women who are engaging with really the key issues of our time. And I ask these five to come because they are doing this. It's not theoretical for them. They are engaging these issues in the public arena. I mean, it's one thing when we're in the safety of our little church cloisters to blast away about how strongly we feel about anything. It's a very different thing to do what these brothers are doing in the public arena, to speak unashamedly, here is who we are and here's what truth looks like. So I'd like to start by having them each one just briefly introduce themselves, their name, their country, their institution, and then a little, this will be the hard part to keep brief, but just a little bit about what are the kinds of arenas that you're dealing in the public arena when you're speaking to these public issues. So, Peter, the lost one back there, you can start for us, please.
I'm the black sheep because I'm neither an intellectual. I'm the black sheep here because I'm neither an intellectual nor an academic. So let me apologize for that. I'm a New Zealander, general surgeon. I've been in the UK for 28 years, for 25 years working with Christian Medical Fellowship, which is a group of 6,000 doctors and medical students throughout the UK and Ireland. I've been chief executive for the last 16 years. My main interest is in listening to academics and putting their wisdom into the language of the street to communicate it to the masses. So the context in which I do that are speaking at schools and universities on issues at the interface of Christianity and medicine. So it might be anything from euthanasia, abortion, embryo issues, HIV, all of that kind of stuff. I do a lot of that. I do public debates with exponents on the other side of those issues. And then thirdly, I'm doing a lot of media work, both internationally and nationally and regionally, radio and television, again on issues at the interface of Christianity and medicine. So in the public arena, but as I say, my interest is in finding ways of expressing Christian truth that connect with ordinary people and being a bridge between academia and the usual, normal people, if you like. Excellent. Not implying that academics aren't normal people.
I'm, of course, Visser from the Netherlands. I'm a sociologist of religion, and I'm working with Forum C, and it's a forum on faith, science, and society. And we try to stimulate scholars from all kinds of disciplines to speak out publicly, but also to relay their faith to their scholarship. One thing we do is organizing debates on what we call big questions. So we don't organize debates on like, was Christ real or something like that, but questions, both Christians and non-Christians are interested in, like, are we more than our brain? Is there a society possible without forgiving? Things like that. And we invite both Christian, non-Christian scholars. We always do that together with a secular partner organization to get a group of people who is really mixed. And well, that most of the time that goes fairly well, not always, of course. And we've also got a website which we are doing mainly the same thing. So our idea is questions to really bind people together from Christian, non-Christians, and let have a good conversation, and then have scholars speaking about what they think is right, what they think, and then rather fluently Christ is being sometimes on the stage.
Yes. You've got to check out Forum C's website. It's just an amazing resource of information. Forum C. What is the full website?
Well, we've got to. I think you mentioned is our website on faith and science is like all kind of from humanities and social science to natural science is geloofenwetenschap.nl. Geloofenwetenschap.nl. When you want to know, just come to me and I'll write it for you down. It's in Dutch, so it's in Dutch. Yeah.
I'm Daniel van Wachter. I'm a philosopher. I was trained in Oxford by Richard Swinburne. I'm German by origin, and now I'm the director of the International Academy for Philosophy in the Principality of Liechtenstein. So that's where I'm living now. And I give talks, of course, at philosophy conferences, also concerning God and the gospel in the subject that's called philosophy of religion. And besides that, I give quite sometimes talks to student groups, Christian student groups, at universities organized by student groups, and to other groups, whoever invites me.
But you're also doing some writing specifically, aren't you, on some of the issues that are...
Yes, in philosophy of religion, I do a lot of writing. I mean, in philosophy of religion today, in the analytic philosophy of religion, all topics of theology and philosophical questions about God are being addressed and quite thoroughly dealt with, and the Christian perspective has quite a strong voice there.
And I'm Per Evert, or Ewert in English-speaking places. I was here in the academic network last year, so it feels good to be back on home pitch. 9 years ago, there were several Christian leaders in Sweden who founded a Christian think tank. Stefan, myself, and a number of others who gathered the best experts with the warmest hearts, Bible-believing Christians who felt that we need to influence society in all areas with Christian thought. So we formed a think tank called the Clapham Institute, based obviously on the Clapham sect and William Wilberforce's heritage. And last year I was elected director of this think tank, which is very exciting. And we try to connect, if we say we have church, we have academy and the political world, and we are in the field that connects these areas in society and try to influence it with Christian thought and biblical values. So that's what I do. Academically, I'm in an institution in Norway, and my PhD thesis project is about the secularization process in Sweden. Sadly enough, we are the most secular nation on earth, especially when it comes to the combination of individualism and secularization. And my goal is to figure out what have been the historical driving forces behind this, because I don't think it happens by coincidence that a nation takes a certain turn. But we'll come back to these questions.
And here you have another Swede. I'm sorry for that looking out. I think Espen down there from Norway should have been sitting here in my chair instead. But anyhow, I'm here. So I'm Stefan Gustafsson from Sweden. I am the General Secretary of the Swedish Evangelical Alliance, and have also been leading a study center in Christian apologetics in Stockholm, Credo Akademin, which is now transforming into a new apologetic work called Apologia. And my involvement has been in both those two roles as General Secretary of the Swedish Evangelical Alliance and as an apologist in Sweden. So I've been involved in the number of public discussions and debates and in media in issues related to religious freedom, freedom of conscience, a number of ethical issues like abortion and euthanasia. I've been a lot in the discussion a number of years ago in terms of gay marriage, where I was leading the campaign that claimed that we already had a really good definition of marriage in Sweden. And I've as an apologist, been involved in a number of university missions and in many, many debates with non-Christians, especially with the secular humanists in Sweden. And as you understood from Per's presentation, secular humanism is the totally dominating worldview in Sweden. But I've also done some debates with New Age people and liberal theologians, and even some debates with Catholics on the agreements and disagreements between evangelicals and Roman Catholics.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you see we've got a range of approaches and kinds of topics that are addressed. So let me just ask you then, to jump to a very practical end result, what are some lessons you have learned in your public exposure of truth? What are lessons that you have learned? Maybe things that you wish somebody would have told you before you launched into defending and presenting Christian truth in the public arena.
Well, I already mentioned it. When we started as Forum C, so 8 years ago, 7 years ago, we already had a vision of scholars being active in the public debates, and we organized public debates with big names, both Christians and non-Christians, but we organized it alone. And, well, we had some crowds, but there were 95% Christians who said, okay, it's nice, but it's not what we want to achieve. So we made a decision, whenever we organize a debate, it should be together with a secular organization. And surprisingly, we just called a famous debating center in the Netherlands, and they were really enthusiastic about, oh, it's great, Christians, we don't have many Christians in the debating center. That's also a lesson. We only go to our own parties, we don't ever go to parties of someone else. But they really were, and we still have the relationship, and we do together two debates a year sometimes, and also with some other debating centers. So just do it with others, and you get better questions and you get better people when you are partnering with other organizations. Yeah.
What I've experienced through giving talks, I mean also in philosophy, but then to the public, is, and that now refers to the German audience, but I think for quite a few audiences, other audiences in Europe too, is that the audiences react well to and long for clear statements. Now it's different in various countries. Clearly the intellectual sort of style is different in Britain, but for the German context, now what are the Germans like briefly? They're very confused and humble, shy, anxious. They can't properly stand up and give a proper talk. They step from one foot to the other. There are many reasons for that. They can't talk properly. Now, when somebody stands up and says something clear to them, now not dogmatic, not shouting at them, but just giving a clear statement, that's my view, and then even adding some reasons and perhaps being reasonable, I find they react very well. They look at me and they really want to hear that. Now, so that's what I would recommend, and it depends on your country, but that's something about which I'm passionate, to work out that. And perhaps if you are from a certain country, try to step out of the role or the habits into which you got and see how you can learn that to defend a clear statement. Now, there are differences in style. Americans do it slightly differently than slightly more, I don't know, less relaxed Germans would do that. So adapt it to your culture, but making a statement clearly to an audience and giving reasons to it, and perhaps add some passion or exhortation. That's, I think, universal. That's always good for Christians and the gospel.
I'll connect to that. One lesson that I've learned is how important it actually is to combine brain and heart. The biblical verse that I've experienced as a calling on my life, and I felt this since young age, is from Psalm 45, where it says, "Draw forth victoriously in defense of truth, humility, and righteousness. It is possible. I think it's necessary to combine these. I was in a public debate arranged by the Secular Humanists a couple of years ago, where there was a panel and we were discussing faith and science. Afterwards, some women came up to me and said that, okay, I don't believe in God, but I was thinking about that woman next to you. I agree with her, basically, but she was so incredibly aggressive. I saw the heart in you, and I'm pretty sure that is necessary, and that helps in showing that we communicate the truth, and we also communicate it because God has loved the world that He sent His only begotten Son.
Stefan, you told me a year or so back about weren't you at a debate and there was a Muslim woman that really protested, but you began conversations with her. Am I a little confused? Sometime when you really formed a personal friendship with somebody and started meeting with them, and eventually they even started studying at your, am I in a different universe?
Yeah, that's true. It's a long story. I'm not sure I can tell the whole story now, but it was actually a student that had just started to study with me, and there was some special background. She was not a committed Christian at that point, but I felt the Lord's leading to accept her into our studies, and this was at the time when we had the campaign for keeping marriage a male-female relationship. And we had a public meeting just outside the parliament in Stockholm, where with a number of parliamentarians and leaders of different kinds, and I was one of the speakers. And as I stood up on this platform, I saw there was a group protesting, performing as a theater, a lesbian wedding. And I suddenly realized one of the women were my student, that I've just shown particular grace and letting her into our institution as a student. So of course that was provocative. The day after, I met her in the classroom. So I just said, I saw you yesterday. We obviously have different opinions. Yes, we have, she said. But then there was a marvelous development for her to grow into the Christian faith and become a committed Christian, and then gradually and painfully starting to realize a Christian perspective on different aspects of life, including sexuality, and in the end changing her own view on sexuality and on marriage. But it was a long, slow process where respect, a lot of discussion, a lot of thinking, a lot of wrestling took place. So it's for me it was a very positive experience of see how God was working in an individual's life during a period of a number of months. So that was a great joy, both for her and for me to see that.
Peter, you probably do more TV and radio appearances than anybody I know. And probably many of us are not as comfortable in that setting. Can you share with us some of the lessons you've learned as a TV personality?
I think what my involvement has underlined for me is that the principles you see in the book of Acts, in which, of the context in which the apostles shared the gospel, work equally today in the 21st century. And I think there are three important principles. First of all, they preach the gospel in words people understood. So de-jargonizing and putting in the language of your hearers a Christian worldview on an issue. Secondly, it was done in an environment where people felt comfortable. So you want to talk to Jews, you go to the synagogue. If you talk to the philosophers in Athens, you go to the street or the Areopagus and so on. And then thirdly, it was in the context of dialogue or discussion, not monologue. And if you think about those three things, in words people understand, in an environment where they feel comfortable, and with the opportunity for dialogue, that's when you really get big numbers coming along or being able to address. And what we've found is that whereas people won't come to straight gospel talks, if you take an issue that is of great public interest and address it in the context of dialogue where people are comfortable in the environment, then you really can engage. And just examples, we used to run talks for Muslims. Was Jesus a Muslim is a good title, and you'll get, a good group will come, but they'll be mainly Christian. But if you want to debate was Jesus a Muslim, and you put on a debate and get a leading respected Islamic apologist, then you will get hundreds and hundreds will come, and 95% of them will be Muslims. And I've done that, and it really is an amazing opportunity to meet. With the media, I think the media is the modern Athens, where people like to talk about the latest thing and listen to discussion. And you can get up, you just think you can get up before at breakfast time before church on a Sunday, and I've done this on a number of occasions. You go to sit in a radio studio, and you might do 10 consecutive BBC regional interviews on a topic where you're speaking for 5 or 6 minutes in a debate with somebody else or with the presenter on 12 separate debates. You get better and better as you go through the day, see. But each one of those, there'll be 100,000 people listening. So at the end of 2 hours, you've spoken to 1 million people, and church hasn't even started in the morning, Or if you're on the BBC World Service, there might be 50 million people listening. Now it's much shorter, but people are really interested if we can combine words people understand, an environment they feel comfortable, and who's more comfortable in their own home or car listening to the radio or watching television. Hopefully not watching television in their car. And with opportunity for dialogue where people are coming back at you with the questions that the listener would want to be asking, but doing it in a very skilled way that puts you on the spot. And I think what I've found in this, it sounds scary, and I tell you, the first live, I was told when I began media, start with friendly recorded radio. Friendly, Christian, recorded, so if you make a mistake it doesn't matter, radio, so they can't see you. Now, as it so happened, in the providence of God, the first media opportunity I ever had was hostile live television. And I tell you, I was so scared. I wrote down my points, tried to memorize them. I put them in my bag. My bag had a 6-figure combination lock on it, and I was so anxious I forgot the combination and couldn't open my bag and had to force it open on the way to the studio. And it is scary when you start, but actually the more you do, the less intimidating it becomes. And I think the reality of it is that as the Lord promises to give us the words, when we stand before kings and emperors and others, and he promises to give us the courage, and he really, really does. And that what I want to say to you is that is my experience. You put yourself out there in fear and trembling, the Lord will really help you to do it, and you'll come in time really to love the opportunity and to grab the opportunity that it gives you.
Well, speaking of fear, what would you say are some of the negative experiences you've had? Let's just put the dirty truth out there. What are some bad responses? What have you encountered? Because I know you don't want to portray it as, it's a great thing, it's very comfortable, it's a lot of fun, always. So can you tell us some negative things that have happened but you've still persevered?
Well, there are also always some interviews and that just thinking, okay, I missed a point, or when I have an interview, it's not that often. I always have some key points that I want, whatever the questions, this is what I want to say, and that's always a struggle with interviewers because they want to have their story and you want to share your story. So Well, but sometimes there's an interview and you feel okay, it's not comfortable and you haven't said what you've said, but or it's not in a manner you wished you have said. But that's the most. Well, I don't have really negative issues with that. Of course, when you write an article and you read in a newspaper all the comments below, it doesn't matter who you are or what you are. That's always the blessing of internet and the reactions on the internet. Yeah.
I can name another debate I was in a couple of years ago on euthanasia against Sweden's probably most well-known atheistic philosopher Torbjörn Tännsjö, and the secular humanist. Why don't we arrange more debates ourselves? But they arranged it, the secular humanists, and the attitude and the atmosphere was incredibly hostile. And you sort of feel weaker and weaker. One thing that I did before, I rarely do this, but I asked my church to pray for me, because I felt that this time I'm going up to Mount Carmel and there are 500 prophets of Baal with their hammers trying to hit me in the head with it. And it felt like that. And afterwards there were 2 former students that came up to me. Those were basically the only 2 that were on my side. And they said that, wow, what happened there? It was like you were thrown out into a pack of wolves. Yeah, that's encouraging to hear. So I went home and I felt more or less devastated because it felt so tough and so hostile. But afterwards, I watched the debate on the internet, and that made me a bit more encouraged, because then I felt that, okay, I kept warm and I kept to the arguments. And then we're back to the brain and the heart again. So afterwards, I think that it actually went quite well. And there are obviously lots and lots of more people who have watched it afterwards on the internet, and they didn't hear the sighs and the attitude. So if we keep that, it helps.
I can confirm it went quite well. I've seen it on the internet, and you're doing quite well. Even though they are treating you badly. But I was impressed what you were doing there. I think we should be prepared for some things that happen regularly. In one debate, I was really personally attacked in a kind of ugly way, going after my person and even things that are hard to do something. You have not caused it yourself, namely your looks. So someone not really wanting to respond to an argument, but attacking me personally. Interestingly enough, in the latest book of the leading Swedish secular humanist, he's using that debate as an example of how bad public discussion sometimes can be, and really criticizing my opponent. But in that situation, we were discussing an important issue, and suddenly he angrily attacked me personally. It is very humiliating to be on a stage and experience that, but to then be prepared when someone is attacking you personally, show the audience what just happened. Instead of responding to the attack, saying, this is interesting, we are having this argument on this issue, and now suddenly you are saying things about the way I look. This is not the way to have a public discussion. Or sometimes if you discuss the existence of God, this has happened a number of times. I remember once in Norway where my opponent became so angry and upset, and instead of discussing the arguments for or against God, he suddenly started to throw in 10, 15 of the most difficult verses in the Bible. And of course, it's a very difficult situation, how to handle it. And then to be prepared to say, oh, that's interesting. We could have 15 more debates, each on those topics from the Bible, but this debate is on the existence of God. Let us keep to this issue, to show the audience what's going on. And it takes some preparation on beforehand to think through, if this come up, this will be my response. If this happens, this will be my response. So that would be one of the things I've tried to do.
As you too mentioned now, the attitude of the heart to the others, from that sounded very convincing, and I'm sure that was very good. But I want to add an idea about sort of the other side of it. I think a warm heart is good, but there is a danger of being misled by that to being always soft and what's conceived to be charitable, which really doesn't help and is really a kind of anxiousness and defensiveness. So I think that is right. And for example, dealing with a personal attack, that sounds perfect to me as you describe it. But I think there is also need for really a good fight. Now, it will be a matter of judgment when what is necessary, but I think we need to keep in mind, now when the argument is there and the setting is all right. Now, I should first emphasize again, a warm, loving attitude, positive attitude towards the person, I think that's always good. And I remember myself, there is also the danger of getting sort of angry in a way. That's bad. But on the other hand, having a good fight and really fighting against a bad argument, that can also be an important point. And attacking against an attack, fighting properly back, there is also room for that. Just to add that, I think that in order to make it complete, that's necessary too. It will be a matter of temperament and of judgment of the situation, what is required when. But there is the danger, I would see that among Germans, I would say, among German Christians, to always assume the positive, a good intention on the other side. No, it's not like that. Not everybody has good intentions. Not every argument is based on serious considerations. That's worth to keep in mind. And sometimes we need to fight.
Well, Martin Luther himself certainly embodied the willingness to have a good fight. But it is interesting, after this coming to blows practically with Zwingli, I think at Marburg, that he did concede at the end. What love for God Zwingli had. I mean, they were disagreeing about what for them were very core issues, and they fought tooth and nail. But at the end, he still had his admiration for Zwingli's personal walk with God. So, but with a secular opponent, of course, we'll never respond to their personal attacks with a fight, but yeah, to engage the issues. And that brings up probably one of the most common responses is, oh, you're intolerant, you're unloving. Here we are in a pluralistic world, and here you're narrow Christian. How do you respond to that charge of intolerance and being unloving because you're saying same-sex marriage is wrong, or euthanasia is wrong, or abortion? How do you respond to this?
Can I just add something on the last question to say, I think it's really important to remember, as Paul says, that we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. So never see your human opponents as the enemy, but see them as victims who've been deceived. And try to be as pleasant as possible. So if ever I'm in a television or radio debate or another big debate, I always, before the thing, find my opponent and go up and introduce myself and smile and get into conversation. It's actually harder for them to be horrible to you on the air if you've already come across with them. And even, especially on the euthanasia side, and I've invited people out to dinner, you know, and had a 3-hour meal with one of them in which we started talking about Christ and the gospel at the end. So try to, make friends with your opponent on the way to court, if you like, is the principle. And don't see them as the enemy, and don't bear any public animosity to them. And then I think in the context of the debate, I can remember I had to do a debate on euthanasia where we had 2 on each side and a very, very biased presenter who was a BBC television presenter and was terribly biased towards us, and 95% of the audience were against us, and it was absolutely horrible. But you do come across much better than you think you have, and you do get to make points. So even if you're not getting favourable response from the opposition or the audience, you just have to stand your ground. And I think also a sense of humour is incredibly important. If you can make a joke or smile and stay calm, you communicate a lot through your demeanour as well as the argument. I was in a studio debate for the BBC Big Questions on transgender, and the 50 people in the audience, and I think only 2 of us thought transgender was not a good idea. And of course it started with the Richard, who'd become Rachel and was a theologian and thought this was wonderful. And this person got 3 minutes of uninterrupted adoration, and then the presenter to me and said, "Right, Peter Saunders, Chief Executive of the Christian Medical Fellowship, what would you do if one of your kids wanted to transition?" And then I was interrupted 3 times in the next 10 seconds, and that's the reality of it. But you just have to stand your ground, smile, keep going. And if your opponent loses it publicly and gets angry, then actually whatever you say, you've actually won the debate. And I had a euthanasia activist, a guy called Philip Nishka from Australia, who kills people with lethal injections and things. And I was on a radio debate with him, and I knew I could get him angry just by reading out things that he'd written. So I said, "Let me read to you what Philip said," and I just quoted it. And he got so angry, and he hung up 3 times during the interview and had to be phoned back. And each time he came back, he was more broken and apologetic. So if you are pleasant but firm and strong, and stand your ground, it often communicates more than the words do. Sorry.
Now, let me to add, you don't have to go in any situation because you think, oh, I'm a Christian and a scholar and I should be in a public debate. Always ask, who are you? What are the opponents? What is the setting? And I know of a lot of Christian scholars who said happily, okay, I do not go in this debate because of the setting, and I don't feel comfortable, or it's not a place where I may flourish or something like that. And I know a very bad example, and it's on stem cell research, something like that, what to do with breast cancer, and there was a television debate between a Christian professor, a real expert, and a mother. So it was. You never can win a debate like that with someone from his personal experience, like against an expert. So he should have said, "No, I'm not going into this debate because you can only lose." So be critical on the invitation and say, "Okay, maybe it's not for me, or maybe it's not for anyone." But
on the question, how should we react to the accusation of being intolerant? Never ever apologize, and never ever say, "Well, I'm sorry if that hurts you." That overlooks the fact that the accusation of intolerance is just a tool and a weapon that's very old. It exists already in the 18th century. It was reinforced by Herbert Marcuse. You should all read that article where he describes what liberating tolerance is and repressive tolerance is. We need to know that's just a tool, and never ever apologize. Now, be friendly by all means, but don't give in, don't play their game, and try to make clear, that's my opinion, and we are here for a fight, or for a debate. And plea for freedom of opinion. I mean, you are here to debate, so there is just no point. You were not intolerant, so don't apologize for it, because it's not a normal situation. It's not like an interhuman situation where you need to be sensitive. No, you need to make clear that you were not intolerant. And if you imply that perhaps you were a little intolerant, they will use it against you. They will not compromise. They will use it against you.
And remember that if there is a debate, it is about the arguments. If somebody claims that you can't participate in this debate because I think you're intolerant, it's no argument at all. So we often, because they try to corner us and put us in the corner and says that this is your place and now we're going to beat you until you move out of the room, there's no necessary position for us to be, because we believe that the Christian worldview is true and that it's worth building all spheres of society on. We discussed in the Politics and Society Network yesterday, we had a visit from Fiona Bruce, whom most of you probably listen to. Fantastic woman who stands firm as a Christian in different issues. And we discussed another British politician who have been pressured in British election campaign now, and he pulled back, and he pulled back even further. And does he win respect in that? No. We win respect by showing that we believe what is the truth, and we stand firm on it, and we do it with a warm heart as well. It is possible to do that.
Daryl mentioned the question of gay marriage in relationship to the accusation of intolerance, and I think here it's important to distinguish if we are accused in the issue of gay marriage, or if it's an accusation relating to the general question of homosexuality. If someone would say something to me about gay marriage and being intolerant, my response would be to say, no, not at all. No marriage definition is all-inclusive. So all marriage definitions draw a line. So this is not a question about being tolerant or intolerant. It's a question of where should we draw the line. Some relationships should be called marriages, others are not. So that would be my response on that issue. If it's an issue generally on homosexuality, my response would be slightly different, starting not by explaining my position on homosexuality, but explaining my position on a liberal society, saying I'm all for an open and free society where people can choose their way of life themselves. So I'm not here to limiting people in the way they live. But if you ask me, what is a Christian guidance in terms of sexuality, I'm happy to present how we look on this issue. Because in the background, when people are raising questions about homosexuality, there is often this fear that we are wanting to impose legal restrictions on sexual lifestyle. And that's not my goal, at least.
May I strongly support that? I think that's very important. Now, there are some theoretical questions about what we think the state should be, but I think, as Stefan made the point, that's quite obvious, and we should go that way, and we need to make that clear. I recommend, should not ask for special treatment by the state, or we should not ask for the state to promote our views or our religion, our faith. We want, you form your own view, but I want a free state. I want a state where we and everybody else can live their culture and do their thing and do what they believe to be good. So we are not trying, as in contrast to our opponents, we are not trying to use state power to push through our views and our opinions. And with that, it does look different. And I think, therefore, Stefan's point is quite important. And of course, we have to consider the European history there, that neither Protestants nor Catholics really got that right for a long time. They did use state power in order to push their views. And although Christians failed there, in my view, nevertheless, Christianity is the religion, and probably the only religion, which can really help human beings to see that the state shouldn't run religion, the state shouldn't run culture. But because we Christians are a minority, just one group in society, we don't want state religion. We want freedom, we want property, we want to live as Christians.
I think we need to be aware of the subtle difference in definition of the term tolerance. Now, tolerance used to mean respectful disagreement. So if I tolerate you, I may disagree strongly with your opinion, but I will accept your right to express it, and I'll put up with you. As Voltaire said, I may disagree with your opinion, allegedly he said this, but I'll fight to the death for your right to express it. That's what tolerance used to be. Now tolerance means affirmation. Agreeing totally with the other person. And there was a politician in Britain who will remain nameless because his name will arouse various emotions here. But he said something recently, we're raising a whole generation of young people who believe that there's only one acceptable opinion on every issue. It's absolutely Orwellian, he said, and it has to be resisted. And so I think we have to turn the thing around. Now, I've been called a homophobic bigot on Twitter more than 1,000 times, I can tell you, and it stops having an effect after the first 100 times. But so I wrote a blog titled, "I'm Coming Out as a Homo Skeptic," you see. So, and I said, Christians often are accused of being homophobic, but let's think about that word, homosexual, phobic, fear or hate. I said, well, I don't dislike, certainly not hate gay people, and I'm certainly not afraid of them or intimidated in the least by them. I just disagree with their presuppositional framework. So I'm coming out as a homo skeptic because I'm skeptical of the idea that homosexual orientation is biologically fixed and determined and that it can't change, and a whole lot of other things. And so I put this up, and it was interesting. There was no response at all on Twitter. And then I sort of Googled it and found that they were discussing it on the gay bulletin boards. What do you make of this? How can we answer this? So and then of course after a while they all came back and it was just, "Oh, Peter, we know you're a homophobic," but they, but we have to turn the argument around and make the point that the fact that we disagree doesn't mean we don't love or respect one another. It's how we can have a debate in a free society. And the whole thing about these accusations of intolerance, it's only a ploy to shut you down. So do not capitulate to it. And I think it's a form of bullying. You could call these people cry bullies. That's what they are, like crybabies. The cry bullies. Don't be intimidated.
May I add one thing here? I've mentioned I think we need to study these strategies and developments at a slightly wider scale, philosophical or ideas or political, and see what's going on. And in support of what Peter just said, there is a postmodern strategy it's associated with these kinds of authors to blur the distinction which underlies freedom of opinion, which is the distinction between having a disagreement and hitting him in the face or taking some of his property away. That's why you see all these terms where there is a disagreement, they start calling you phobic, or they call it hate speech. And they do frequently. It's really a strategy in the sense that it's happening all the time and it's actually deliberate. That when there is a disagreement, you have a certain view. They don't take it that way. They do not want freedom of speech. They accuse you of attacking somebody else, of doing some evil to somebody else, so that you ought to be punished. That's the strategy, and we need to affirm freedom of opinion and make the audience aware of that.